Can everyone hear me at the back? Thank you. I would never be told that I'm quiet. Ask my husband, I'm not a quiet person, but hopefully you can hear me. I'm going to talk about Horticulture Outreach Collaborative, but I first wanted to thank the two morning speakers because for me it was a refresher course in community-based social marketing. It's been a while since I've attended one of those workshops, so thank you. It made me think about when I think about social marketing and some research that the TRCA has done, and I'm going to be sexist here, but I often think in my head it's men behaving badly because not only with snakes but with lawns, because we've done some research into lawns and the way people, or the perceptions about lawns, and my master's was actually on lawn care, and it's fascinating the lengths that men will go to maintain a perfect lawn. Not just men, but when we do the workshops on lawns, it's predominantly men that come out. Gardening workshops, we get women. Lawn workshops, we get men, so that's kind of interesting. Before I talk about this project, which is fairly new, I want to take us back and talk about Healthy Yards. Oh, thank you. Healthy Yards is a project that I worked on from 2003 to 2010 while I was in the stewardship group at TRCA. And I had just come back from parental leave, and we wanted to encourage people to do what they were doing in public lands, coming up for plantings, to do that kind of thing on their own property. And certainly we were getting calls from some of our constituents that they wanted that kind of a program. But before we started our own program, we did a scan of what programs and policies were out there. Policies like ravine bylaws and tree bylaws, because the City of Toronto has a lot of bylaws, and also programs that say Evergreen is delivering or City of Toronto is delivering. And we looked for a niche, and we decided that our niche would be native plants, encouraging people to put native plants in their gardens. We were pretty naive, and we were doing all those things that we weren't supposed to be doing, like sending out 1 million brochures and having our brochures just full of a lot of information, but trying to reduce our costs by making them black and white. So they were not very attractive. They had a lot of information, but I attended a community-based social marketing workshop, and in a very kind of minor and haphazard way, we decided to implement some of the theory of community-based social marketing because we were working with a very small budget and a staff of 4 days a week. So native plants, this is old news for you, but there are many definitions of native plants. I like to focus on the connections, not so much where the area a plant comes from, or you know, if it's now with climate change, things are moving. The areas, the region of a plant may move, zone. So I like to think of ecological connections, and I think often of the Douglas Tallamay book, which I just love, the Bringing Nature Home. It articulates the reasons for native plant gardening so well, and I have a couple quotes from that book that I'll show you soon. Definitions of alien and exotic or non-native plants, you can use any of those terms to refer to the same kind of plant. In the project that I'm working on, I'm interested in the invasive non-native plants or invasive alien plants. This is a chart that I took from the Douglas Tallamay book just to demonstrate how a species in its native range, which you see. Okay, so these are the species listed. This is an American book. So in Canada, we don't have all of these invasives. We have this bottom one, Phragmites. Phragmites in its native range hosts 170 species of Lepidoptera. In North America, it only hosts 5 species. So when you think of how much of our landscape is now devoted to invasive plants, it's a lost opportunity. We're losing the habitat for our native insects and then the birds that rely on those insects. This is also taken from Douglas Tallamay's book, but I like to put it in my presentation just to show how conservation authorities and others have learned and adapted over the years. When the TRCA used to promote bird gardening, they had on their list of plants, this one up here, autumn olive, which now is considered an invasive, sorry, I'll try to stay still, invasive species. Now we know that we want to encourage people to plant the native berry-producing shrubs. The autumn olive does provide berries for birds, but it doesn't provide it doesn't host the Lepidoptera species, the caterpillars, that the birds require when they need high-protein food to then produce viable young. So I attended a workshop, Douglas Mackenzie Moore workshop a few years ago, or probably 6-7 years ago now, and without much of a budget, there wasn't really all that much I could do, but I really liked the idea of identifying the barriers and coming up with a target audience. Then in 2006, the TRCA hired a company, a firm called Freeman and Associates, to do a really interesting study on people's perceptions and behaviors related to lawn care, related to gardens and lawns. And what they found was that there's a deeply held aesthetic motivation based on an inflexible understanding of a beautiful landscape. That basically most people have this idea of a beautiful landscape as a lawn with some border plantings. We actually asked people to draw pictures of what they, and this is just so, it was so telling because we asked people to draw pictures of their ideal landscape, of what they thought, and then what they thought was a natural or native landscape. And in the natural and native landscape photos, there were actually dead animals. It's true. And these are adults doing these pictures. Dead animals. It was really messy, so they were scribbling in all different ways. And when they did their ideal landscape, it was very well designed. So we had to rethink the way we were promoting native plants. And what we decided to do was we decided to focus really on, well, to stop using the words natural and native all the time because of the negative connotations, and also to focus on the plants that were more acceptable, that we thought would be more acceptable. Like, people don't like really tall plants. And I know I'm generalizing, but in most cases, people want a nicely designed garden with lower plants. So you're not going to be asking them to put in big blue stem or cut plant because they can get really tall. But you might want to focus on like little blue stem and black-eyed Susan, other ones that are still going to get at your ecological goals, but they're more acceptable to people. So color, height, and structure were really important, and always to incorporate a strong design element. So we would hire, not only, before it was like me doing the talk or an ecologist doing the talk about the value of native species, we started to hire people that have more experience in garden design and have them really incorporate messages that we wanted, but also give the people what they wanted, the design element. And then, I'm just going to take a sip of water and I'll get to the last point. So those three top barriers, strategies mentioned, those are from the barriers identified in the survey done by Freeman and Associates, but the bottom one was something that just was always nagging me. We were encouraging people to plant these native species, but where are you going to find them? In Toronto, at least, in the Greater Toronto area, you cannot find locally grown, locally sourced, oh my God, 7 minutes, native plants. So we're like, what are we going to do? So when we had our events, we would often bring in the native plant growers. But even that was not really getting at the problem, because our study, Freeman Associates study, shows us that most people are buying their trees and shrubs at Home Depot and Canadian Tire, and their plants, the herbaceous plants, at large nurseries. They're not coming out to my rinky-dink little native plant talks and sales. So we decided to start the Horticultural Outreach Collaborative. It was myself and Rod Crick, who's I'm all stressed about my time, employee of CVC, Credit Valley Conservation. We decided to come together. He was really concerned about all the invasives that are for sale, and I was more concerned about the native plants that weren't for sale. But we came together and we decided to start up this project. We became an official committee of the Ontario Invasive Plant Council in 2010. And that's great for us because then we didn't have to set up our own term of reference and everything. We have this home, and being a part of that council is fantastic. On the top, you'll see some of our founding members. Right away, we approached Landscape Ontario because we can't do this without their input. Oh, thank you. 3 extra minutes. Okay. So Sheridan Nurseries, at the start, we had some conversations with them, but really quickly, early on, they sort of stepped back. So they're not really involved anymore. But Landscape Ontario has a staff person that comes out to all of our meetings. And I think that's fantastic because, you know, ecologists often have, and conservation authority staff are living in a little bit of a bubble, and it's good to have the realists there and the people that are saying, no, that's not going to fly, and that's not what the growers want, that kind of thing. We also have academia involved. We've had some students help out with certain types of research projects. These are quotes taken a while back from the Canada Food Inspection Agency. The bottom one there, 50% of the known invasive plants in Canada have been introduced intentionally through the horticultural trade. So it is a problem. We know that invasive species are a significant threat to biodiversity, and we know that a lot of them are coming in through the horticultural trade. It's interesting that south of the border, there's legislation in place in a number of states banning or prohibiting the growing of Norway maple and goutweed and a few others that we still have, and there are there's no regulation about what comes in and what gets sold as of now. But we're hoping, and I don't know what's best, the carrot or the stick, but we're hoping to work with the industry to make them more aware of the problem, and in time to change their growing habits.